At our family reunion, my grandma leaned close, squeezed my hand, and whispered, "Leave the room right now." I didn't understand why she said it, but seconds later, the entire house filled with shouting and chaos erupted. That was the moment I realized my grandma knew something none of us did, and it changed the way I saw my family forever. Before we go further, make sure to hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 22 when this happened, and at the time, I thought our family reunion would be like all the others. Loud, messy, but nothing unusual. My grandma, Margaret, was the heart of our family. She was gentle, but sharp, the kind of woman who could quiet a room with just one look. I always felt safest near her, especially when our relatives started clashing. That day, Grandma's farmhouse was filled with cousins, aunts, and uncles. The smell of roasted chicken and pies drifted from the kitchen, and laughter mixed with little arguments carried through the house. My mom, Linda, was busy setting the table, trying to keep everything organized. My Uncle Rick was already making snide comments about how the food wasn't ready fast enough, and his wife Teresa hovered near him, staying quiet but tense. My younger cousin Sophie, only 15, sat near me, scrolling on her phone, pretending not to hear the bickering. I tried to stay calm and enjoy the moment, but I could feel the tension under the surface. Every reunion seemed to have a storm brewing somewhere in the room. My mom gave me a quick look as she carried plates. "Claire, can you help with the drinks? Your uncle's already complaining." I rolled my eyes and stood up. On it, same old Uncle Rick. Grandma chuckled softly from her chair, her eyes following me with that knowing look she always had. "Just keep your head down, sweetheart. Some storms are better to avoid." I laughed a little, thinking she was only talking about family drama. But looking back now, I know she meant more than that. For a while, everything looked normal. The table was set, the food was served, and people gathered around, passing dishes and trading stories. But even as we sat down, I noticed the sharpness in Rick's voice and the way my mom pressed her lips together, trying not to respond. My stomach tightened without knowing why. Something felt different this time, like we were sitting on the edge of a fire waiting to spark. The meal began like any other, with plates passed around and people making small talk, but the tension in the room was impossible to ignore. Uncle Rick sat across the table, his shoulders stiff and his tone sharp, as he complained about everything from the mashed potatoes to the seating arrangement. His voice cut through the chatter, and each time he spoke, the air seemed to grow heavier. Aunt Teresa sat quietly beside him, her hands folded in her lap, but her eyes darted nervously toward him every time he raised his voice. My mom tried to keep things calm. She smiled tightly, kept the conversation on lighter topics, and did her best to ignore his remarks, but I could see her jaw clench each time he made a jab about her decisions or her past. It wasn't unusual for them to argue. Everyone in the family knew they had old grudges, but tonight felt different. Rick's words carried more venom, and my mom's patience was wearing thin. I glanced at my cousin Sophie, who sat a few chairs down, her fork barely touching her plate. She looked younger than ever, shrinking into herself as the voices grew sharper. I felt a knot twist in my stomach. Family dinners were supposed to bring people together, but this one felt like it was unraveling with each passing minute. Grandma sat quietly at the head of the table, her eyes moving between her children like she was reading the room more carefully than anyone else. Her expression was calm, but there was a tension in the way she held her silverware, the slightest tremor in her hand as she sipped from her glass. She knew something was coming. I didn't understand how, but she always seemed to sense the storm before it hit. The first real spark came when Rick leaned back in his chair and smirked. "It must be nice, Linda," he said, looking straight at my mom. "Always acting like you're the one holding this family together, when we all know who actually pays the bills." His tone was mocking, but there was steel behind it, and the table went quiet. My mom set down her fork and met his eyes. "This reunion isn't about bills, Rick. It's about family. Maybe if you remembered that, we wouldn't have to deal with this every year." The silence broke into a low murmur as cousins and aunts exchanged uneasy glances. The words hung in the air, heavy and charged, and I could feel Sophie's gaze darting nervously between them. I wanted to say something, to diffuse the tension, but before I could, I felt a gentle squeeze on my hand. I turned to my grandma. She leaned close, her face calm, but her eyes sharp with warning. In a whisper only I could hear, she said, "Leave the room right now." Her words startled me. I froze, unsure of what to do. Why would she tell me that? Was she worried the fight would get worse? Or did she know something else was about to happen? For a moment, I just sat there, my hand trapped in hers, her grip stronger than I expected. I glanced back at the table. Rick's face had turned red, and his voice rose again. "You think you know everything, Linda, but you've been taking advantage of Mom for years, acting like the favorite child while the rest of us clean up after you." My mom's eyes flashed, and she leaned forward. "That's not true, and you know it. Stop twisting things to make yourself the victim." The voices grew louder, overlapping as other relatives tried to calm them down. Aunt Teresa muttered something under her breath, and Rick snapped at her, too, his voice so sharp that Sophie flinched. My heart pounded. This wasn't just another argument. It was spiraling fast. Grandma's hand squeezed mine again, firmer this time, her whisper urgent. "Claire, get up. Take Sophie with you. Now I hesitated, torn between doing as she said and staying to see what was happening. My curiosity fought with my fear, but then I saw Sophie's wide eyes, the way her lips trembled as she stared at the adult she looked up to, and I realized Grandma wasn't just protecting me. She was protecting her too. I leaned across and touched Sophie's arm. "Come on," I whispered. "Let's go upstairs for a bit." She looked at me, confused and scared. "Why? What's happening?" I forced a smile I didn't feel. "It's okay. Just trust me. Grandma said we should." As I rose from my chair, pulling Sophie gently with me, I felt every eye flick toward us for a moment. The room was bursting with tension, but I kept my head down, guiding her out of the dining room and into the hallway. My heart pounded as the voices behind us grew sharper, the arguments spilling into accusations and shouting. We slipped around the corner, out of sight, but I couldn't help glancing back once. Grandma was still at the table, her calm presence standing like a wall between my mom and Rick. She had seen this coming. Somehow she knew exactly when the storm would break. And just as Sophie and I stepped into the hallway, the sound of a fist hitting the table echoed through the house, followed by voices erupting all at once. The hallway outside the dining room felt colder than the rest of the house. I guided Sophie quickly, my hand firm on her shoulder, but she kept looking back, her face pale, as if leaving the room meant abandoning the rest of the family. The voices behind us grew sharper, spilling through the doorway like cracks in a dam about to burst. Plates clattered, someone shouted, and I could hear the scrape of a chair against the wooden floor. "Claire," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. "What's happening? Why did Grandma tell us to leave?" I swallowed hard, trying to sound steady even though my own heart was racing. "I don't know yet, but she wouldn't have told us if it wasn't important. We just have to trust her." I guided her toward the staircase, away from the chaos, but every step felt heavy. My mind kept replaying Grandma's grip on my hand, the way her eyes had looked right through me, calm but urgent. She had known exactly what was about to happen. That realization both comforted and terrified me. Comforted, because she was always the one who kept us safe. Terrified, because if she thought the situation was dangerous enough to pull us out, then it was worse than I could imagine. We reached the bottom of the stairs, but my feet froze. I couldn't help myself. I turned back toward the dining room. From where I stood, I could see only the edge of the doorway, but the raised voices carried clearly. My Uncle Rick was shouting, louder than anyone else. His words tumbled over one another, full of anger that had been festering for years. My mom fired back, her voice strong but shaking at the edges. Other relatives tried to intervene, but their words were drowned out by the storm. I knew Grandma had told me to leave, but curiosity and fear pulled at me like opposing forces. Part of me wanted to run upstairs with Sophie and block out the noise. The other part needed to know why she had chosen this exact moment to send us away. Sophie tugged at my sleeve. "Claire, I don't like this. I think we should just go upstairs. Please." Her eyes were wide with fear, and for a moment, I considered agreeing, but then another sound echoed from the dining room, the slam of a fist hitting the table, followed by the sharp crash of glass shattering. Sophie flinched, covering her ears. My breath caught in my throat. This was no longer just shouting. It was escalating. I pulled Sophie closer to me, lowering my voice. "Okay, listen. We'll stay right here in the hallway for a minute, but if it gets worse, we're going upstairs. Deal?" She nodded reluctantly, clinging to my arm. The noise inside grew fiercer. Uncle Rick's voice cut through everything, accusing Mom of lying about money, about promises Grandma supposedly made. The bitterness in his tone sent chills through me. It wasn't just anger. It was rage, built from years of resentment. And then I heard my mom, her voice sharp and clear. "That's not true, Rick. Stop trying to twist everything. You know exactly what Grandma said." The room erupted again, voices overlapping, people shouting over each other. I saw shadows shifting across the walls, the movement of bodies rising from their chairs. My chest tightened. I wanted to step in, to protect my mom, but then I felt Sophie's small hand in mine, shaking. I couldn't drag her into that storm. That was when Grandma's voice rose above the chaos, not loud, but firm enough to cut through it all. Enough. The single word froze the room for a heartbeat. Even from the hallway, I felt the weight of it. Grandma rarely raised her voice, but when she did, everyone listened. I squeezed Sophie's hand, whispering, "See? She's handling it." Still, my dad's absence at the table struck me. He had been quiet the entire night, sitting further down, avoiding the argument, but now I could hear his voice trying to calm Rick down, firm but steady. That gave me a flicker of hope. Maybe things wouldn't spiral further. Maybe the storm could still be contained. Yet my instincts told me this wasn't over. Grandma had warned me to leave before the real explosion, and she was never wrong. She had seen something I hadn't. I made a choice in that moment. I wouldn't run upstairs and hide, but I wouldn't step into the room either. I would stay here in the hallway, close enough to protect Sophie, far enough to keep her out of harm's way. If anything happened, at least we'd have a path to escape. Sophie leaned into me, whispering again, "Do you think they'll stop?" I looked at her, at the fear etched across her young face, and forced myself to sound braver than I felt. "They'll have to. Grandma won't let it go too far." The truth was, I wasn't sure, but I clung to the thought that Grandma's warning wasn't just about leaving the room. It was about positioning ourselves where we could be safe. She had protected us before, and she was protecting us again now. As another crash echoed from the dining room, followed by another roar from Rick, I held Sophie tighter and prepared myself for whatever came next. The storm had broken wide open, and the only thing left was to see how far it would go before someone stopped it. From the hallway, I could feel the house shaking with voices. The walls seemed too thin to hold all the anger inside that dining room. Sophie clung to me like a lifeline, and I wrapped my arm around her, bracing myself for whatever came next. My grandma's voice had cut through once already, but it hadn't ended the fight. The storm was still building, and I could tell we were only moments away from the peak. Uncle Rick's voice rose above everyone else's. "You've been lying for years, Linda. You think you're so perfect, but you've been taking from Mom behind our backs. Admit it." His words came out like bullets, fast and sharp, each one meant to wound. My mom's voice fired back, shaking but strong. "I never took anything from Mom. You're twisting the truth because you can't accept responsibility for your own failures." Gasps filled the room. Someone tried to step in, probably my dad, but Rick's fist hit the table again, hard enough that I heard the plates jump. Glass cracked, and a dish clattered to the floor. Sophie whimpered against me, and I whispered, "It's okay, stay with me," even though I wasn't sure it was okay at all. The shouting turned into a roar, with multiple voices clashing. Aunt Teresa's cries cut through, pleading with Rick to sit down, but he shoved his chair back instead. The sound of wood scraping against the floor sent a jolt through me. He was on his feet now, towering over everyone, his anger filling the room like fire. Then came the words that shifted everything. Rick pointed at my mom, his voice shaking with rage. "You think you can just take the house when Mom's gone? Over my dead body. This place is mine. She promised it to me." The room went dead silent for a second. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. The claim hung in the air like smoke, poisonous and heavy. Sophie looked up at me with wide eyes, whispering, "He can't be serious, right?" I didn't know what to tell her. Finally, Grandma stood. Slowly, carefully, she rose from her chair at the head of the table. Her hands pressed against the wood as she pushed herself up, and the room stilled under her movement. She wasn't tall and she wasn't loud, but the authority in her presence demanded silence. Even Rick hesitated, his chest heaving, his face flushed with fury. Her voice came steady, sharp enough to slice through the air. "Rick, sit down." He shook his head, defiant. "No, not until she admits what she's done. Not until she says this house is mine." Grandma's eyes narrowed, and I felt a chill run down my spine. She looked at him the way only a mother can look at her child, with both love and disappointment layered together. "This house is not yours." It never was. Rick's jaw clenched, his fists balling at his sides. "You promised me." "I promised you nothing," Grandma cut in, her voice rising for the first time that night. "You've been telling yourself lies for years. This home belongs to me, and when the time comes, it will go to who I choose. Not because of shouting, not because of threats, but because of love and responsibility. And you, Rick, have shown none of that tonight." The silence that followed was so deep, it felt like the air had been sucked from the room. Every pair of eyes was on her, stunned. Even Sophie, trembling beside me, went still, watching through the crack in the doorway. Rick's face twisted with anger, but for once, he had no words. The authority in Grandma's voice left no space for argument. He stood frozen, his chest rising and falling as if he wanted to scream, but couldn't find the strength. Finally, he muttered something under his breath and stormed toward the door. His footsteps pounded against the wood floor, and then came the slam, the front door shaking the house as he left. For a long moment, no one moved. The room sat in stunned silence, broken only by the sound of Aunt Teresa quietly crying. My mom lowered her head, pressing a hand against her forehead, exhausted from the weight of it all. My dad's voice finally broke the silence, calm, but firm. "All right, everyone, let's take a moment." I looked at Sophie, who let out a shaky breath she had been holding the entire time. "He's gone?" she whispered. I nodded, hugging her tightly. "Yes, he's gone. You're safe." Through the doorway, I saw Grandma slowly sit back down, her shoulders heavy, but her face steady. She had faced the storm head on, carrying the truth in her hands, and somehow she had calmed it. My chest swelled with both pride and awe. She had known exactly when to act, and her strength had kept everything from breaking completely apart. In that moment, I finally understood why she had told me to leave the room. She hadn't wanted me to see my uncle at his worst, hadn't wanted me to be dragged into the ugliness of years-old bitterness. She had wanted to shield me and Sophie from scars that weren't ours to carry. The chaos was over, but the lesson was only beginning. When the front door slammed shut and Rick's footsteps faded into the night, the silence that followed was almost painful. It wasn't the kind of silence that brought peace. It was the heavy kind, thick with shock and exhaustion. The dining room looked like the aftermath of a storm. Plates sat untouched, glasses knocked over, and the food that had once smelled so inviting now felt cold and unappetizing. I guided Sophie back toward the room cautiously, but I kept my arm around her in case she needed to leave again. She looked shaken, her eyes darting nervously from face to face, as if she wasn't sure whether it was really over. My mom sat slumped in her chair, one hand pressed against her temple, her shoulders trembling with anger and relief. Aunt Teresa wiped tears from her cheeks silently, not moving to follow her husband, but staring at the table as though she didn't know what to do next. Grandma sat back at the head of the table, her presence as steady as ever. She didn't raise her voice again, and she didn't need to. The authority in her earlier words still lingered, echoing through the room like a bell no one could unhear. For a long while, no one spoke. We all just sat there, stunned by what had happened, waiting for someone else to break the silence. Finally, it was Grandma who spoke first. Her voice was softer now, but it carried the same weight. This family has survived too many storms for me to watch it fall apart over greed and anger. Tonight was ugly, but it doesn't have to define us. Her words hung in the air, and I felt something shift in my chest. She wasn't just speaking to Rick, though he was gone. His shadow still lingered in the room. She was speaking to all of us, reminding us that our choices in moments like these decide what kind of family we truly are. My mom lifted her head, her eyes tired but grateful, and nodded. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered, her voice cracked with emotion. "You always know how to stop him." Grandma sighed deeply, looking older in that moment than I had ever seen her. Stopping him isn't enough. He has to stop himself. Until then, all we can do is protect each other. I watched her closely, realizing that her warning to me earlier had been more than just instinct. It had been love. She knew what was coming, and she knew Sophie and I didn't need to be scarred by it. By pulling us out of the room, she had given us safety, a way to stay untouched by the storm. Later that night, when most of the relatives had left or gone to bed, I found myself sitting alone with Grandma in the kitchen. The house was quiet now, only the hum of the refrigerator filling the air. She poured herself a cup of tea and motioned for me to sit across from her. "You listened to me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You took Sophie out when I told you." I nodded. I didn't understand why at first. I wanted to stay and see what happened. Her eyes met mine, full of both wisdom and sadness. "That's why I told you to leave. Some battles are better seen from a distance. You don't need to carry every wound this family creates." Her words sank into me like stone dropped into water, rippling outward. She was right. Watching my uncle explode, seeing years of bitterness boil over, that wasn't something Sophie or I needed to hold on to. Grandma had carried enough of that for all of us. The next morning, the house was quieter. No one spoke about what had happened directly, but it was there in the air, unspoken and heavy. Aunt Teresa had left early with her husband, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. My mom busied herself in the kitchen, avoiding the subject altogether, but Sophie stuck close to me, her hand brushing mine every so often as if making sure I was still there. As we packed up to leave, Grandma hugged me tightly. She held on longer than usual, her voice soft in my ear. "Remember what you saw. Remember that leaving the room doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it means strength." On the drive home, I kept replaying her words. For the first time, I understood what she meant. Walking away from chaos wasn't giving up. It was choosing peace over destruction. That lesson would stay with me for the rest of my life. Even now, whenever I find myself caught in arguments or surrounded by tension, I remember that night at the reunion. I remember Grandma's grip on my hand, the calm in her eyes, and her whisper that saved me from being pulled into something that wasn't mine to fight. It changed how I saw her, how I saw my family, and how I saw myself. That night taught me that family doesn't just mean blood. It means protecting each other when the world feels heavy, even if that protection comes in the form of a whispered warning to walk away. So, if you're watching this, take this story as a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is step out of the storm before it consumes you. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your stories too.